Hi everyone, I'm Sarah from Sourdough for Beginners, and today I'm going to do a large batch of sourdough in my Bosch Universal Plus stand mixer. I've got tons of tutorials on my channel, all based on sourdough for beginners, so please subscribe, hit the notification button, make sure you follow along. Today I'm going to do 5 loaves. So I'm going to use my level 2 hydration recipe, which is usually 100 grams of starter, 350 grams of water, 500 grams of flour, and 10 grams of salt. And I'm going to multiply that by 5 and see how the Bosch stand mixer handles it. So I'm going to go through all of that. But first, I want to show you my new apron. So I made this myself. I shared about it on the page the other day. So if you saw it on the page and you've been waiting to see, here it is. And I've sewn a set of ribbons on here. So these are reminiscent of a native ribbon skirt. So I'm an Oneida and I've been making ribbon skirts. I made a little ribbon skirt tutorial. I'll link that too. But I just wanted to show it to you. It'll be featured in all of my tutorials now. Okay, so the mixer. I received this Bosch Universal Plus white stand mixer about a week and a half ago. I've used it to make a regular 2-loaf batch, and I've used it to make donuts. And so far, I'm really, really happy with it. NutriMill, the company that sells these, I reached out to them and said, hey, we've done these posts in the group. People seem to really love the mixer. It seems to come out on top. So we've got several different posts in the big Facebook group, which I think is at 950,000 followers right now. And every time we do a post, people talk about the KitchenAid. They talk about the giant 20-quart Vivor. They talk about other mixers that are out there. And of course, they talk about the Bosch stand mixer. And every single time without fail, this one has come out on top. From the 2 times that I've used it, I think I can see why, but we're gonna put it to the test today for a big mixer. So what I'm going to do is get my ingredients into the bowl, get them mixed up really well, and then I'm going to let the bowl sit for 30 minutes, turn it on for about 3 minutes to simulate stretching and folding, repeat that 3 more times. So that we'll end up doing 4 stretches and folds. And then from there, I'm going to carry on with my regular process. So if you're interested in the regular process for just a single loaf of bread, I'll also link that in the description. So definitely, if you're watching this video, you'll want to read through the description. So we're just going to follow the same essential processes that I always go through, which is to mix our dough to a shaggy dough, stretch and fold 3 to 4 times, get the dough into bulk proofing containers, and allow the dough to bulk proof on the counter. And then after the dough is bulk proofed, we pre-shape it, we shape it, and then at that point we either score it and bake it, or we put it into the fridge and cold proof and then score and bake after cold proofing. So in this video, I'll go through the whole process all the way to the end so that we can see how the bread turns out. So I'll just quickly show you the mixer. So my bowl just twists off. So here it is. So I've got this nice big mixing bowl. I'll be honest, it doesn't look big enough for 5 loaves, but I'm gonna give it a try and see how it goes. It comes with the dough hook, which we're definitely going to use today. It also comes with this dough hook extender is included when you buy the package, like buy the white Universal Plus mixer. And it you would use this dough hook extender when you're doing a smaller batch. So what it does is it helps the dough hook get all the way down to the bottom of the bowl. So this is actually designed to do bigger batches and has things to do if you're doing a smaller batch, which is neat. So today, since we're gonna do 5 loaves, I'm not going to use the dough hook extender. What I like to do is use the whips that come with it to dissolve my starter into my water, and then I switch from the whips to the dough hook for the rest of the process. So this is the axle that moves the bowl around, and it just pops out for easy cleaning. And so when we're working with our bowl, it just sort of pops out and it's really easy to clean. It's nice, smooth plastic. I find that it's very easy to get the dough out of here. So it works quite good. So this just drops into the bowl, and it has like a click mechanism. So you just turn this and click it, and out it comes. Now, I do find that my bowl sits beautifully on my scale. So I just use this, I think it's like 10 bucks. I'll link it, my Amazon basic scale. And I'm able to take my bowl and sit it right on my scale. So I can measure my ingredients into this without having to use separate containers to weigh it first and then pour it in. Scales aren't necessary. There's recipes on my channel that have cups, but I like to use the scale just because it's easier. I don't have to measure and think as much. So, excuse me, we are going to get 500 grams of starter into this bowl. I've got 2 jars on the go just because they couldn't quite handle enough. So I'm going to take 250 grams from each of my starters. So my bowl is sitting on my scale. I mixed this starter quite stiff. I had been away for a few days and hadn't used it. So it's quite a stiff starter today, but you can see it's nice and bubbly. You know, it's looking quite good. And I am going to use most of what's in this jar. So right now we're at 204, 232, add that in, and we'll get ourselves right up to 250 here. So there's 250 in there. So you'll notice that I only have a very small amount left in my jar. That's totally fine. We'll just refeed this. After I get this mixed, I'll go through refeeding your starter, and that's more than enough starter to continue to keep yourself going. So same thing with this starter. I'm just going to measure out 250 grams so that I end up with a total of 500 grams of starter in my mixing bowl. So here we go. This should take us to 500. Maybe one more little scoop. So there we go. And I'll just show you inside the bowl here how much room we actually have. This bowl is so deceiving. Like, let me just show you the difference between a regular mixing bowl. So here is my metal mixing bowl. If you follow me, you've seen me use this lots. I always do a double batch of bread. The mixing bowl looks much smaller, but it's deceiving. Like, that's 500 grams of starter in there. It's a lot. It's really a lot. So we're gonna see if this mixer can really do it. So now I'm going to need 5 loaves worth of water. So 350 per loaf. So that's gonna be 700, 1400 is 4 loaves. So 1,750 grams of water. So I just tared my scale back to 0. And now I'm just going to pour this water in. It's just tap water. If you would drink your water, you can use it in your sourdough. If you don't drink your water, if you filter it, or, you know, try to use whatever you drink in your sourdough. So that's about 850. And we're going to 1,750. And I will type out the single recipe as well as the recipe for 5 loaves in the description of this video. So you'll be able to find that after you watch. So we're getting up there now. We are at, this is 1,500. I might need just one more little drop. 719 I made it to, so I'm just gonna get us another drop of water here. Perfect. And then I'm just going to keep this water jar out because we will use it to feed our starter in a moment. So I'm going to stop the video right now, grab my camera and bring it over closer so that you can see the starter getting dissolved into the water inside the mixer. So we have our starter and our water sitting in our mixing bowl now, and I've moved the mixing bowl onto the machine. As you can see, it's quite compact. It makes it nice and easy to move around. And I'm going to use the whips that come with the machine to dissolve the starter into the water. And then I'm going to switch to the dough hook. So the whips just click on to this little plastic piece that came. And then all we do is line the plastic piece up with the metal piece that sticks up and out. And then we get our lid on. So we just find the safe spot for that, like this. And of course, this lid comes off so that you can add things if you want to. So now what I'm going to do is just dissolve this. Now just watch how easy this works. I like that as it's working, like it does come up over the sides, but it's waterproof. So with this lid on it, even if you're sort of hitting the roof of it, it's like a blender, right? So as you can see, rather than me using my hand whisk, like and going and whisking it up, now we've got this nice dissolved starter in water. So I'm just gonna switch the camera off for 1 second, and then we'll come back and we'll measure in the flour and the salt, and we'll mix again from there. Okay, so now we're going to add our flour and our salt. So it's going to be 5 times 500 grams of flour. And so that's going to be 2,500 grams of flour. And then we're going to add 5 times 10 grams of salt. So 50 grams of salt to this mix. So I just want to show you how easy it is to move this around. So I had the bowl on the mixer. Now I just twist it and it just lifts right off, and I can get it back onto my scale. I can just twist the lid off here. So this one and then this one. So we've got that. I've got this nice, beautiful, foamy mixture that I made with the whips, with my starter and my water. So now I'm just going to use a cup, and I'm going to tare my scale back to 0. And I'm going to get 2,500 grams of flour in here. Oh, actually, one thing I'll do. So I'm done with these whips now, so I can remove them. So I'm just going to pull those out. And now I'm going to add the 2,500 grams of flour. Ooh, I'm spilling everywhere. That's okay. It's part of baking, I guess, is making a mess. So the flour's getting pretty high up. I'm at 1,558 grams. I spilled flour all over everything, but they gave me this little spatula. So I'm just going to use it to push the flour down deeper into the mixer. What's happening is that the flour is floating on top of the starter water mixture. So I'm just going to make myself a little bit of room by pushing the flour down into my water mixture. So here we go. Just slide that off for a second. There we go. All right, so we're at 1,540. So we're going another. Ooh, I'm getting a little nervous here. We're at 1985. So this will bring us close, maybe one more after this. Okay. So that brings us to 22.91. I'm using up almost my whole bag. Here we go. 24.03. This is very full. Very full. Okay. And then we're just going to get ourselves to 100 grams here. Like this. And then I'm going to use my spatula and push this down a little bit inside of here before I add my 50 grams of salt. All right, so 2,500 is in there. So I'm just going to pop my bowl off my scale. I'm very space limited. If you're a space limited person, then I can relate to you, and I think you can still make this work. I do like that the Bosch doesn't have the big overhead thing on top of it, so it doesn't really take up a ton of space on the counter. And what I've actually ended up doing is, what I've started doing is I have started just putting it on top of the fridge when I'm not using it. So all I want to do right now is just get my center part cleared off like this. And then I'm going to push my dough hook in, and then I will add my 50 grams of salt. And I might just use a small bowl to calculate my salt, just to not mess with this anymore. I feel like I might be pushing it with 5 loaves here in the Bosch stand mixer, but we're just gonna see if it works or not. Because if I could make 5, that means on a day when I want to make 10 batches of bread, I only have to do this twice. Instead, what I was doing before was mixing 3 or 4 times in order to get that much. Okay, so I'm going to take my dough hook and I'm just going to slide it down into my mix and make sure I keep the center bit clear. And then I'm going to line my dough hook up with the axle that's in the middle, I think is the word that they're using for this thing. It's the metal part that connects to the mixer. All right, so just like that, my dough hook slides in, and I'm just going to clear my mixer off a little bit here because I made a huge flour mess. And I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to get my bowl on the mixer. It's heavy, goodness gracious, 2,500 grams plus 1,400 grams of water. So I just need to find my spot to lock this in somewhere. There it is. All right, so we just go for the click. So we've got our click, here we go. I'm just going to get a small bowl. Definitely making a mess, but this is my first time trying. I'm going to get better at this over time. So I'm just going to tare my scale to 0, and I'm going to measure out 50 grams of salt. There we go, 50. Okay, so I'm just going to add my salt around here like this. And I'm going to lock my lid on, even though I'm spilling a little. Let's see. Should be around here somewhere. There we go. So we'll just get that locked. I think that's locked. This is locked. And then we will get this locked. There we go. I think we're locked. There we go. Okay, so I'm just going to move the camera again so that you can see down on top of this while it mixes this very big mix of dough. Okay, so if you guys didn't realize at the beginning that this is actually my first time trying it, that this is a true test, it is. So let's see what happens here. I'm a little nervous. Look how full it is, but let's see what happens. Seems pretty stable. It's definitely moving the dough around. It's hitting the roof. I can see that I'm going to have to sort of clean off inside in a minute. I'm going to have to take a moment just to give it a scrape. But it's doing it. That's 980 gram loaves of sourdough. So this mixer right now is handling, what is that? That's almost 5,000 grams. So that's 5 kilograms. So what does that put us at? That's 2.2 pounds per kilogram. So 11 pounds of dough in here. Pretty cool. I'm just going to shut this off for a minute, and I'm going to take my spatula and I'm going to scrape everything down, try to get my lid resettled, and let this mix some more. So my plan after this is to let the dough sit here in the mixer, and then every 30 minutes turn it on to simulate the process of stretching and folding. that's what I'm going to do. And then after the stretching and folding is done, I'm going to separate my dough into bulk proofing containers. So you can separate the dough either right after the stretching and folding is done into individual containers, or you can let it all rise together in just one container. I prefer to separate mine into individual bulk proofing containers because the dough is still stiff at that point. Once the dough begins to rise, it gets stickier and stickier, right? So it becomes harder and harder to manage. So I'm going to separate them at that point. I'll have them in 5 individual bulk proofing containers. I like to use the containers to mix the, or to let the dough rise, and then we'll carry on with our normal essential processes. So I'm just taking a peek down at the bottom, and I don't see any unmixed dough anywhere, which is really fantastic. I'm pretty impressed. So I will say, I feel like 5 loaves might be the max. I had done some math on this, and I was thinking that perhaps maybe it could do 6 loaves, but now that I'm working on it, I'm really thinking that 5 is the max for it. So let's just scrape this down and lock our lid back in. So with the lid, you just kind of work around until you find the sweet spot, and then it locks in so that it won't come off. And then we'll just start this again. So with sourdough, what we want to do is mix to a shaggy dough. And I think what's going to happen is as we stretch and fold with this, we're going to see this dough start to come together onto itself. So I'm going to let this dough rest for 30 minutes, and then I'm going to turn it back on and stretch and fold it for the first time. Okay, so while we're waiting for the first 30 minutes to pass to do our first stretch and fold, which is just in a couple of minutes, I'm going to refeed my starters. I like to keep 2 starter jars going so that on occasions like this, when I want to do a big batch, I can. About the maximum that these jars can hold before I would worry about the lid popping off or overflow is a 300 gram feed, which would be the starter that's in the jar, which is usually about 50 grams plus 150 grams of water and 150 grams of flour. So I just use this for 5 loaves, and 5 loaves is a lot for us. We don't usually use that much. So all I'm going to do is just give these starters a very small feed and let them rise, and then I'll stick them in the fridge. And then next time I'm ready to use them, I'll probably end up discarding them and refeeding them because it's probably going to be, over a week or so. So we'll just see how that goes. Okay, so I'm just going to give 50 grams of flour and 50 grams of water to each of these starters just to refeed them. So I'm going to get my scale on the right units, which is grams. I'm going to tare it to 0 with my jar on top, and I'm just going to scoop 50 grams of flour into here. So if you remember at the beginning of this tutorial, we used almost all of what was in the jar. Like there's hardly any left, but this is more than enough to keep a starter going. So I'll do 50 grams of flour for this one. There we go. And then I'm going to do 50 grams of water in each, which is really not that much at all. It works out in volume. Water is about twice as heavy as flour. All right, so there's 50 grams in that one. And then I'm going to add 50 grams of water in this one. There we go. And then I'm just going to mix these up. So what I'm going to be left with is just a very small amount of starter in the bottom of my jar. And the reason I'm doing it that way is because I don't plan to bake now for maybe till next week, because I'm doing 5 loaves right now, right? I'm going to end up probably giving 1 or 2 away, freezing 1 or 2, and we'll eat 1, right? So I'm just going to do a very small amount of starter in here, mix it up. I like to let it rise on the counter. I like to let it sort of start doing its thing. And then once it's risen and peaked, I usually just stick it in the fridge. If I bake with it within a day or 2 and it's still at peak in the fridge, I'll often just take it out and use it just like that without feeding it again. If it's been sitting in the fridge and it's gone back down to its height, it started to develop hooch, then I'll usually feed it again. With this small amount of starter, say for example, like right now I've got probably 105 grams of starter in this jar total, because there was only about 5 grams of starter left in each jar. But so say if I want to make a 100 gram loaf, then I might just feed this 25 grams of starter and 25 grams of water, which makes it a total of 150 in here. And then when I use it, it leaves 50 behind. So I'm usually always leaving about 50 behind. But once your starter is established and strong, we don't need to worry as much about ratios and keeping everything exact. I mean, once it's alive and it's super resilient, you can just feed it what you need. You can feed it, if you need 100 grams, feed it 50 grams of flour and water. If you need 200 grams, feed it 100 grams each of flour and water. So I'm just going to pop my lids back on. I am firmly in the tightly sealed lid camp. As long as you leave enough room within your jar, you don't have to worry about the lid popping or overflow. And I think that the tightly sealed lid keeps the fruit flies out. My daughter's been ordering these mangoes lately, and no matter what we do, they attract fruit flies. So the tightly sealed lid keeps the fruit flies out, and of course I think it also prevents mold as well. Okay, so the next 3 clips are going to be 1, 2, and 3 stretch and folds for this dough. We'll see if we need a 4th, and then we'll carry on with getting our dough into our bulk proofing containers. Okay, so we're going to turn this on for our first stretch and fold. So I can already tell by looking at it that it's starting to get smoother. So this is the same way that sourdough works when we do it by hand, right? The first time we mix it, it mixes up into a shaggy dough. Then when we do our first stretch and fold, it gets a little bit smoother. And then by the second, third, and fourth stretch and fold, it gets more smooth, so that by the end, it's nice and elastic. So it is kind of climbing up the dough hook right now. I am grateful for this lid. I'm happy that that's there because I think this would overflow if it weren't there. But I have watched videos of this mixer being used, and when people mix with it, they just let it touch the roof, which I'll admit feels a little weird for me, but it seems to be working okay. I was thinking that for stretching and folding, I would let it run for, a minute or 2 or 3 minutes. I'm just going to see what turning up, if I turn it up, what happens. Going for about a minute and a half right now. So I'm going to let it run to 2 minutes, about 15 more seconds, and then I'm going to open the lid, push the dough off the dough hook, and let it sit another 30 minutes. Looks good. It looks like sourdough. I don't have any concerns about the dough. It is definitely interesting how the dough climbs up the hook like that. I imagine it doesn't do it as much with a much smaller batch. This is quite a big batch, but the dough is feeling just like any other sourdough, right? It's sticky, just like sourdough always is, but it is getting a nice sort of smoothness to it quicker than if we were stretching and folding by hand. It's not passing the window pane test yet, which isn't always necessary, but if you can stretch your dough and it sort of stays together without ripping, then you know you've built strength. And what we're doing with stretching and folding is building strength. So I'll be back in 30 minutes and we'll do stretch and fold number 2. Okay, so let's do our second stretch and fold. So after the first stretch and fold, I actually took a moment. I always do all of my dishes after I get that first stretch and fold done. So I mix my dough, and then I do a stretch and fold, and then I clean up. So I did all my dishes from mixing, my whips, my measuring cups, everything else, and I actually took the lid off of this and cleaned it. I used like a piece of paper towel, cleaned all around the edge of the bowl, cleaned the lid. There was definitely some dough stuck in these little clips that clip on, but it didn't seem to hinder anything. So this is my second stretch and fold, and I am just going to let it spin for 2 or 3 minutes and then wait 30 minutes again and do a third stretch and fold. So as you can see, it's moving the dough around. I don't love suction cups on appliances. I find it hard to slide the appliance around when I'm working, especially since I have a small space. I do like to move things, but I am happy for the suction cup on this machine because it's a big batch of dough, right? What did we say it was? 5 kilograms. So that's like almost 12 pounds of dough. And so the fact that it's staying put, like here's my hands, no hands, right, is really a good thing. I have heard stories about other mixers actually like scooting off the counter and falling on the floor and breaking. So I don't think that's going to happen here with the Bosch. For this stretch and fold, I have actually turned the level up to 3. So this comes with levels 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then there's an M, which is, the M is just, you turn it and it stops and goes, right? And you can go sort of all the way to max. Now, if you look at the dough, you can see that it's starting to get pliable. It's starting to move a little. It's starting to really work together. So far, I'm happy with how this is going. I'm just going to let it spin again for another quick minute. And then I'm going to take off the lid and see how the dough is feeling now. We're going to just check sort of how much strength we've built on this dough. So I'm just going to click my lid off and look at our dough here. So it feels like sourdough, right? It's sticky and there's lots of moisture in there. The reason we stretch and fold is because sourdough would be too sticky to knead like traditional bread. So I'm just going to push the dough down off of our dough hooks. I do love that everything that's in here exposed can get stuff on it. It seems that seems like it's going to be good for mixing. So we're starting to build some strength. We're starting to get a little bit of a window pane happening, but our dough is still breaking. So I'm just going to let this rest another 30 minutes, and then I'm going to do our third stretch and fold. So we'll be right back. Okay, so stretch and fold number 3. So the dough's been sitting here. I'm just going to do the same thing this time. I'm just going to let it rock and roll, build up some strength, and then I'll come back and do stretch and fold number 4. And after stretch and fold number 4, we'll look at the strength of the dough, and we'll get the dough out of this bowl and into our bulk proofing containers, and then carry on with the rest of the tutorial on how to do a big batch of sourdough. So we'll see you all soon. Hey guys, at this point in the tutorial, my house got hectic. There were lots of people around, the kids were running around. So what I did was just film the rest of the process, and I'm going to voice over it for you and tell you what we're doing. So the 4 stretch and folds are all done. We have a beautiful looking dough, sticky like sourdough. I'm just going to get the dough hook out of my mixing bowl and get this dough dumped out of the mixing bowl. Once it's dumped out of the mixing bowl, I'm going to separate it into 5 960 gram loaves and get them into our bulk proofing containers.
Next, I used my bench scraper and my scale and my bulk proofing containers, and I separated this huge pile of dough into 5 loaves, about 960 grams each. Next, I used my regular bulk proofing process where I use a marker to mark the height of the dough in the bulk proofing containers. I will link the bulk proofing success video in the description of this video so that you can see how and why we do this. But essentially, marking the height of the dough shows me where it started, and then later I can see how much it has grown. About 3 hours later, my dough was at least 75% grown, bubbly, ready to go. So it's time to scoop my dough out of each of these containers, pre-shape them, let them rest for a moment, and then shape them and get them into the bannetons. After my dough had rested for a little while after pre-shaping, I got ready to do the final shaping. I'm actually going to use the same containers that I used for bulk proofing as bannetons. I don't have 5 bannetons, I only have 2. And I also need to be able to stack these in the fridge, so I like being able to put the lid on. So I'm just going to get this dough shaped and onto pieces of fabric and towel that I've got some flour on, and then put them back into the bulk proofing containers, which I'm going to use as bannetons in the fridge. After my dough was in each of the makeshift bannetons, I sewed them up, covered them up with the fabric, put the lids on, got them ready to stack up and put in the fridge. I ended up leaving 2 loaves in the fridge overnight for one night and baking them, and I've got 3 loaves left in the fridge to bake now that have been in there for about 2 or 3 days. These are the first 2 loaves that I baked the next day after mixing. I'll just show you how they turned out. They've got a decent crumb, they got a good rise. I'm pretty happy with them. I still have 3 more loaves in the fridge to be baked, so I'm going to take you through how I like to bake my sourdough in my Dutch ovens, temperature, all of that sort of thing.
I'm going to bake 2 of the 5 loaves that I mixed today. So the way I did it was I let the dough cold proof for one night, and the next morning I baked 2 loaves in my Dutch ovens. It's now been 2 more nights, so the dough's been in the fridge for 3 nights, which is about as far as I usually go with cold proofing. So I'm going to bake the other 3 loaves this morning. I'm just going to do them all in my Dutch oven. So I'm just going to do 2 rounds, these 2 loaves, and then I'll do the last loaf. If you're starting to get to the point where you want to bake 5, 6, 10 loaves all at once, then I'm going to link a bunch of things for you in the description. One way to bake a lot of dough is to use loaf pans. Sourdough bakes great in loaf pans. So I will link our No Dutch Oven sourdough video to show you how to do that. Another way is to open bake. But if you're going to open bake, I really suggest that you have a baking steel or a baking stone in your oven. Sourdough needs heat in order to create spring. So when we take our dough out of our bulk proofing containers, it's kind of flat. It's only a couple of inches tall. We cut a score line into it, and then that high heat in the oven causes the moisture inside of the bread to get super hot and then pop. And then that's what gives our dough our rise. That's how we get our nice ear. And that's how when we cut into our dough, we've got those nice big holes, that nice sourdough look. That comes from high heat. In a Dutch oven, that heat is trapped inside and it works really well. But you can open bake. The baking steel or stone in your oven, you can buy a big one so that you can get 4, 5, 6 loaves on there per rack. So you could potentially do between 6 and 12 loaves all at once in a normal oven. But what they do is they retain that heat and keep it super close to the dough so that you can replicate that high heat that you need. So my Dutch ovens are in the oven. They're preheated and ready to go. I've got all of my supplies. I'm going to bring my camera in a little closer so that you can see. We'll take the dough out of the cold proofing containers. We'll get them scored. We'll get them into our Dutch ovens. I'm going to bake them for 25 minutes with the lid on, and then about 10 minutes with the lid off. And after 10 or 12 minutes, I'm going to use a regular meat thermometer to check the temperature of the dough and get the bread baked to 205 degrees internal temp. So I like to put tin foil in the bottom of my Dutch oven underneath my parchment paper. I think it just creates a nice air barrier and keeps the bottom of the bread from getting too hard to cut. And I reuse my parchment paper twice. So I just baked the other loaves with this the other day. I've got my dough in my cold proofing containers. So you would normally use a Banneton, but I didn't have enough. But this is beautiful dough that's been sitting in the fridge for about 3 nights. So as I mentioned before, this is about as far as I would ever cold proof some dough. But I'm just going to tip it out of my bulk proofing container. I'm going to flour it, score it, and get it into the oven. So just a little bit of flour on my parchment paper here to keep the dough from sticking. And then we're just going to flip this over, lift off our container, and then just peel my towel off the dough. As you can see, this dough is very puffy. About 72 hours is usually the max I go with cold proofing. There's lots of air trapped inside of this dough. I'm going to work fairly quickly. I've pulled the dough straight out of the fridge. I don't let it sit on the counter at all right before I bake. So I wait until my Dutch ovens are fully preheated, and then once they're ready to go, I get my dough out, get it scored, and get it straight into the oven. So here's my other one. I can feel that it's really puffy. It's been in the fridge for 3 nights, so I'll just do this and unwrap them, tip it onto my parchment paper, and then take this fabric off. You don't have to use the fabric inside of a Banneton. It's optional, but I do like to do it because it prevents anything from ever sticking. So I'm just going to take some flour and coat the top of these loaves. So just rub it in. And the flour on top of the loaf is purely aesthetic. It's optional. Some people use rice flour. I used to. I'm just using regular flour now. It's really just for looks, right? And I'm just going to do very simple scores today. Nothing special. So I stole this straight razor from my husband. I often use it. And I'll often just take a regular razor blade and use it. So for these loaves, I'm just going to cut a very simple score line where I would like my ear to form, where I would like the steam to escape. So I'm just going to make sure that that score line carries all the way through. And then same thing on this one. This is very airy dough. It's been in the fridge for 72 hours. So I hope it's not overproofed, but I don't think that it is. So I'll just cut this nice score line. You want it to be the main score line where you're allowing the steam to escape. You want that to be about 1/2 inch deep. So nothing special today, just a spot for the steam to escape. So now what I'm going to do is pull my Dutch ovens out of the ovens. Make sure that I don't let the heat that's in there melt my mascara, which happens to me all the time. So So here we go. These are very hot. They've been preheating for, I would say about 45 minutes or so. So I'm just going to drop my tin foil in here. Oops, come on now. And try not to burn myself. And then I'm just going to use the parchment paper as a sling and slide my bread into the Dutch oven. So this is very proofed dough, 3 nights in the fridge. But it was well mixed, right? Like when we mixed it up with the Bosch mixer, we did a good job building strength with those multiple stretch and folds. You know, we pre-shaped and shaped the bread, so this is well taken care of dough. So hopefully it springs and looks perfect. So there we go. We've got this first round in, and I'm just going to set my timer to 25 minutes. And after 25 minutes, I'm going to pull the lid off, let this bake a little longer with no lid on, and then we will use a regular meat thermometer to check the temperature. So we'll see you in a little bit. Okay, so we're just about at 25 minutes. And I am going to pop these loaves out of the oven and take the lids off. So at this point, they should be sprung. They should have burst and opened up their score lines that I put on. So there you go. Nice and sprung. So now I'm just going to pop them back into the oven for probably around 12 minutes, and then I'll use my meat thermometer to check the internal temp, and I'm going to cook these until they hit 205 Fahrenheit. Okay, so I'm going to pull these out, take their temperature. If they need a few more minutes, I'll pop them back in. At this point, I actually like to pull them out of the Dutch oven, and if they do go back in, I'll just sit them on the parchment paper in the oven. So I'll just pull this out. Woo! Sometimes it's fun trying to get these out. There we go. And we will take our temperature. So we're looking for 205 internal. And we're hitting about 201. So I'm just going to pop these back into the oven for 2 or 3 more minutes, and then they should be good to go. We're all set. I've got one of my Dutch ovens back in the oven preheating, and I'm going to bake the 3rd loaf that I have. And then what I'll do is I will let these loaves cool for at least a couple of hours, and then I will come back and film cutting into them. But as you can see, they look perfect and great. My gloves make this so much easier. So there we go. So we'll let those cool. I'll bake the other loaf. Maybe I'll do like a quick time lapse of getting that one ready, and then I'll come back later and cut into these and show you how they look on the inside.